Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of Programming Problems. Today we will do Advent of Code 2015, Day 5, but the question is, doesn't Santa have Intern-Elves for this? In today's problem, Santa has a bunch of strings and he wants to determine which are naughty and which are nice. A nice string has all of these three properties. It contains at least 3 vowels. 2. It contains at least one letter that appears twice in a row. For instance, AA. Lastly, the string should not contain any of these forbidden pairs of characters. Now, given a list of strings, how many of them are nice? Let's take a look at some examples. Here we have a nice list and a naughty list. The first nice example is nice because it contains the vowels U, I, and O. It has a double D. And lastly, none of the forbidden pairs is present in the string. The next example, 3 times the letter A, is also nice. Again, it has 3 vowels. It has at least one pair of adjacent letters which are the same, and trivially it contains no forbidden substring. Now for the naughty list, you'll find that the first example has no double letter. The second example contains the pair X and Y, which is forbidden. Finally, the last example contains only one vowel. Hopefully this makes the rules pretty clear. Please go ahead and write your solution if you haven't already. Now, let's look at the solution. Today's problem essentially just asks us to write a few validation checks for a list of strings. So, if we write our code right, then you just loop over the strings in your input and increment a counter if a string is nice. This can look as follows. Where is nice returns the logical and of 3 or more vowels, and at least one duplicate, and no forbidden. To not just leave you hanging here, today shall contain a bit more implementation details in Python 3. For the first check, we can store the vowels as a string. Then in our function, we make a counter and set it to 0. Now for each character, let's call it C. In our string, we can check, is C in our vowels word? If so, we increment the counter. At the end, we just return if the count is greater or equal to 3. Checking for at least one duplicate requires us to iterate over the string in pairs. There are various ways to do this, but I think one of the simplest ways is to just use a raw for loop. So we loop over the range from 0 to the length of s-1. Note the -1 here to take into consideration that we always want to access element I plus 1. If we do this, then we can check the string at index I and index I plus 1 every iteration. If those two are the same character, then we return true. If we encounter no doubles during the loop, then we return false at the end. Lastly, we need to check if there are no forbidden pairs. Instead of grabbing the pairs again, as we did in the previous function, we can just loop over the pairs in the list named forbidden. So for each pair in forbidden, if that pair, named each, is in the input string, then we return false. If there was no forbidden, then we didn't find anything, so we return true at the end. Now for part 2 of this problem. Santa has decided that his method was flawed, and now he has new rules to determine which string is naughty or nice. The old rules no longer apply, and the new rules are as follows. 1. It contains a pair of any 2 letters at least twice without overlapping. And 2. It contains at least one letter which repeats with exactly one letter between them. Given these new rules, how many strings are nice? Let's take a quick look at some examples again. The first example in the nice list is nice because it has the pair, Q and J, twice. And it has 2 letters Z with an X in between. The second example is more trivial and has the X pairs as well as X, Y, X. In the naughty list, you'll find that AAA does not satisfy the double pair requirement. The second example here has no repeating letter with a letter in between. And the last example has no pair that appears twice. Now the solution is again similar to the solution for part 1. But the checks are perhaps slightly more complex. In this instance, is nice can be defined as whether we have 2 pair and at least one duplicate. For 2 pair, we again loop over the pairs, but slightly differently. Please see the example at the bottom. Suppose we have the word, some string. What we do is we take the first pair, S and O, and then we check if this pair is in the rest of the string. If it isn't, then we just go to the next pair, which would be M and O, and repeat the process. If we find that the pair is in the suffix, then we return true. Otherwise, If at the end there was no pair which occurred twice, we return false. To check if there is at least one duplicate, we essentially loop over the string in triplets here. To consider that we want to look 2 characters ahead, we iterate until the length of the string minus 2. Then if index I and index I plus 2 is ever the same, we can return true. Please also see the example at the bottom, where if I is the first x, then we look for the second x at I plus 2. Otherwise, no triplet is ever found, and we return false. And that's it already for today's problem. We have 2 more stars in the bag, and hopefully you've found today's implementation details useful. Let me know if you have feedback in the comments. And as always, see you next time.